Hi and welcome. I'm so excited to be back and sharing a new Procreate tutorial. This one includes an optional sketch and color palette, and the link to download those is below. But feel free to create your own sketch or choose different colors. One thing to note though is that I did create the sketch using the Studio Pen instead of a pencil or any kind of textured brush, and that's kind of important for this one because it's going to help our shapes stay smooth when we use the sketch as a reference for color fill. All of the brushes for this project are default Procreate brushes. I have mine organized into a folder just for the video, but if you need help locating where these would normally be in the brush menu, I have details on that in the description also. I already have my sketch imported here. Alright, so I'm tapping on the sketch layer, and in the menu that pops up, choosing reference. So you'll know it worked by the little reference label underneath. And then I'm decreasing the opacity of that layer by tapping this N and moving the slider and creating a new layer underneath it. I'm also turning off the background by just unchecking that layer, but if you're using the file that I shared, then it is already off. Alright, I'm choosing a slightly off-white color. It's the second color in the palette if you're using that. And on the new layer, dragging this white into the shape of the ghost. Because the sketch is set to reference, it will fill in the shapes that we already drew on the reference layer. On a new layer below that ghost, I'm creating this little back section of the sheet, and then I'm going to go in and do the wood. Now, if your colors are not filling properly, you might need to hold your pencil down and slide it to the left or right to adjust the color fill threshold, like you can see I'm doing right here. So I'm doing every piece of this on its own layer. So I am making a new layer, dragging it below that oval, and going ahead to do this little bar. Now you will see that there is some space in between the shapes, and we will go ahead and fix that later. But for now, I'm creating another layer on top of the ghost. This is for our glass, and I'm choosing light blue. So you're going to stay on the same layer, but you're going to drag the color 2 times. So first this larger section of the dome, and then just the oval. You don't really, well, you can totally do it however you want, but I decided not to have the glass covering the very bottom section of the wood because that's where I want to put the little nameplate. Okay, reduce the opacity of the glass layer by tapping the N and sliding it down. You can turn off the sketch layer or the reference layer by unchecking the box. We do not need that layer anymore. Alright, creating a new layer above the ghost. This is going to be for the eyes. So I'm choosing a very dark color, and I'm using the marker brush. I used this one for pretty much everything inside of the glass. So going ahead to do the eyes, and then creating another new layer. Selecting green from the color palette. This is for the plants, so I'm reducing the size of the brush. It is still the marker brush, and I'm going ahead and just drawing some thin lines down at the bottom. Going back over the bottom a couple extra times for some added thickness. Create a new layer for the flowers, and I'm using this purple color to start. And then for these, I'm using a slightly bigger size of the brush and just doing a bunch of dots. Add more dots at the bottom and less at the top, so it sort of tapers off and into like a triangle shape. And it's kind of like lavender flowers, I guess. I don't know. But go ahead and add the flowers to both sides. And since the marker has that multiply built into it, it will add some extra shading and dimension as you go over the same spots. Create a new layer above the ghost, tap that layer again, and choose clipping mask. This means that we will only be able to draw inside the ghost when we're on that layer. And using the same off-white shade that the ghost started in and the marker brush, we are going to shade some of the lines in the ghost. I have the brush set to about a medium size and the opacity at about 70%. So this marker brush has that multiply effect built into it, like I mentioned with the flowers, and this will help you create some easy shading and dimension without having to keep on changing the actual color of your brush. So I'm just going in and drawing some lines, going over the spots a few times to make them darker and just building it up little by little. We're starting with the darkest areas of the ghost, the deepest shadows, and kind of building up from there. I'm using gentle pressure and going over each spot a few times so that these shadows kind of build up slowly and gradually. And we're doing 4 main dark shadows, and then we'll go in and add some more. But it's this one right down the middle, 2 on either side of that, and then on the left edge of the ghost. Okay, so now I am making my brush size a lot larger and reducing the opacity. Then I'm just going over those same general areas a few more times to add some more shadow. Okay, and then I'm going to that layer that is behind the rest of the ghost, creating another layer above it. Tap that layer, make it a clipping mask, and now I am using the same shade that the same color as the base shade, and because it's a multiplying brush, it will be darker, and so that will add some shadows for us. Okay, and now I'm creating some highlights. So on a new layer above the shadow layer, double tap that layer and make it a clipping mask. I'm going in with the bright white. It is the first color in the palette if you're using the palette that I shared. And I'm just going around the top edge of the ghost, still using the marker brush. Then adding some more highlights along this front corner and just throughout the whole ghost, adding some more lines here and there. And this is the kind of thing that comes out a little bit different every time I do it. And yeah, don't stress about that. Just go with the flow. And even when I was making this, I almost, after I did the shadows, deleted everything and started over because I was worried it was too dark or it wasn't going to turn out as good as the original one that I did. But I just trusted it and I really like how it turned out. So I hope that the same thing happens for you if you try this. And keep in mind with this brush that if you're using the side of your pencil, which I'm mostly doing, it will be a very different kind of lighter effect with the side than if you're putting direct pressure up and down. Going back to the main ghost layer, swipe left on that layer, tap duplicate, and then making sure you're on the bottommost ghost layer. So you want to make sure it's not the one where all the clipping masks are. You're going to tap on the magic wand and then choose Gaussian blur and slide the slider over until you're happy with the amount of glow. And this will also help take away those lines that were sort of left over from the reference layer. All right, let's go to the ground and add some shadows there. So creating a new layer above that brown oval, tapping it again, choosing clipping mask, tap the N and scroll up to change the blend mode to multiply. And then I'm using the Nikko Rull brush, using the same brown color as the base, adding a first layer of shadow, then going ahead, changing the color to a little bit darker and a little bit more red toned, and adding another layer of shadow. Create another clipping mask. So a new layer above this one, and then tap on that layer again, choose clipping mask, and set this one to overlay by again tapping that N and changing the blend mode, scrolling down to overlay. Set the color to a light tan and then just go over and add some highlight. Then create one final clipping mask, so another new layer, tap it again, choose clipping mask, and this time we're going back to the marker brush and the darker brown color, and then creating a little bit of a shadow right underneath where the ghost is hovering. And if you just keep going over that a few times with the marker brush, it will multiply for you. You don't have to change the blend mode on that clipping mask. All right, now we're going to go through a similar process for the front panel of wood, but before we do, we're going to nudge it up to kind of close that gap from the line where the reference was. So I'm tapping the arrow in the upper section of the screen, and then that will select the whole layer. And then I'm just tapping on the screen with my pencil a few times right above that whole selected area, and that will nudge it up, and that will make it touching the oval. Okay, creating 3 clipping masks above this. I'm just creating them all at once this time. And then I'm setting the first one to a multiply blend mode, the second one to overlay, and leaving the third one as normal. Going to that first clipping mask, the multiply layer, selecting my wet acrylic brush, and then I'm just going along with the same color as the base shade and adding some shadows, mostly concentrating it on the left and right edges of the panel. All right, and then go ahead and choose the second clipping mask, the one that's set to overlay. Lighten up the shade that you are using, so it's a tan color, and then just go over and add some brightness to the whole panel. And then finally on that third clipping mask, and using the flat brush, choosing this golden color, which I had originally forgotten to put in my palette, but it will be in there if you downloaded the one I shared. But even if you didn't, you just choose any kind of golden color, or you could do a silver or whatever sort of color you want for this little plate on the front. And then I'm just drawing a line sort of following the same curve as the wood. Now, since that brush isn't fully opaque, I duplicated the layer by swiping left on it, tapping duplicate. I did that 2 times and then pinched them together to merge them. And then I ended up taking my eraser and just erasing the very edges of each side to clean it up a little bit more. Then I'm using 2 fingers to swipe right on that layer. That will turn on alpha lock, choosing the dark brown color from the palette, the studio pen, and just creating 4 dots in each of the 4 corners of that plate. Okay, and now I'm going to the glass layer and choosing the soft brush as my eraser, making it a pretty large size at full opacity, and using the side of my pencil with gentle pressure to erase from the inside out. And I'm also sort of concentrating on erasing the bottom so that that final seam where our line art was will sort of get blended in that way. All right, and for the highlights, I'm creating a new layer above the glass, choosing the flat brush and white from the color palette, and then I'm just drawing a curved line that sort of follows the same curve as the glass. I'm going back to my soft brush eraser at a smaller size and erasing a little bit from each of the edges and then 3 lines through the middle of this highlight. Now create another layer, keep the flat brush but increase the size and just do some super light, very gentle pressure, add some more highlight there, and then one final layer, this time changing to the studio pen, and I'm just drawing some more intense highlights, doing one along the right side, a smaller one along the left, and one along the bottom of the glass that kind of meets that wood base. Okay, reduce the opacity of that layer to about 50% by tapping the N and moving the slider. And that is about it for the shading. But one thing that I was noticing is that there was still a little bit of a gap from where my line art was in between the glass and the wood. So I'm going back to the glass layer and choosing my soft brush eraser and just very gently side of my pencil erasing to blend out that bottom. Okay, I'm going to add some text. So I'm tapping this wrench icon and under the first action item, add, and then down to add text. Type in whatever you'd like. And then this little AA in the top right area of the keyboard will take you into all the settings for your text. So I'm tapping on that, making sure my text is highlighted, and choosing the font and everything I would like for my settings. And then I'm making sure it fits right on my gold plate here. So if at any time you leave this menu and want to go back to editing your text, just tap on that layer in the Layers menu. There will be a little edit text that pops up and you can choose that. So making sure the text is highlighted, choose the color that you want for the main text. I'm choosing this golden tan color. I am swiping left on that layer to duplicate it and then making the new layer a little bit of a darker brown. All right, choose the arrow. That will select this layer. Then doing the same nudge that we did before, tap a few times outside to the left of that box, and that will move it just slightly to the left and down. Then going back to the top layer of text, the first one that we created, I am double tapping on that layer, choosing rasterize. This will allow us to draw on top of that text layer. And once you've set it to rasterize, use 2 fingers to swipe right and alpha lock that layer. Then choosing a very light shade of tan or an off-white, go ahead and use the Nikko Rull brush to add just a little bit of highlight to the right side of each letter. Okay, so the very last step that I recommend is to zoom out and just take a final look at your piece and see if there's any spots that you feel need anything extra or don't have enough contrast or something like that. So for me, these flowers just did not feel like they were popping enough. So I'm going back to my marker brush, but choosing a bright pink color and at a medium opacity, just adding a few dots to the center of each flower. And now I'm happy with them. So that is everything. I really hope this video was helpful to you. If you did follow along and create with me, I would really love to see it. Please share with me on Instagram at ZeraCat Studio. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you next time. Bye.